In November of 1869, on a bare ridge above a Highland glen, every sensible man was building with stone. Every sensible man except Ewan Kerr. Ewan was kneeling in the frozen grass, weaving willow rods into the shape of a wall, not boards, not beams, not a frame, a wall. From a distance, it looked like he was building a giant fish trap for a man to sleep inside. The neighbors stopped on the track just to stare at it. One laughed and said the first snow would flatten it. Another said the frost would split the mud before Christmas. And the old mason from the lower road, a man who had spent 40 years raising stone cottages that were supposed to outlive their owners, looked at Ewan's crooked willow shell and gave the sentence everyone remembered. "That is not a house. That is a basket waiting for a funeral." Ewan said nothing. He only kept weaving. Because what nobody in that glen understood yet was that Ewan had not made his mistake when he chose willow. He had made it when he built the wall twice. One wall outside, one wall inside, and 7 inches of empty space between them. By midwinter, when the coldest storm anyone could remember pinned the glen under snow, that empty space would do something the stone cottages could not. It would hold heat. Not a little heat. Enough heat that a family inside the woven hut could sit without shaking, while stone houses below them burned through fuel and still froze at the corners. By the time the minister put a thermometer inside Ewan Kerr's basket of mud and sticks, the men who had laughed at him had no jokes left. The reading inside was 61 degrees, outside was 9, and in the best stone cottage in the glen, the room had not climbed past 37. A house everyone called firewood had beaten stone by 24 degrees, and it had done it on 3 small pieces of peat a day. Ewan Kerr was not a builder. That was the first reason nobody trusted him. He had spent most of his life in a fishing village west of Fort William, making eel traps, creels, and pack baskets. His hands knew wet willow the way a blacksmith knows iron. He knew which rods would bend cleanly, which ones would snap without warning, and how a loose weave could become stronger than a solid plank if the pressure was spread through enough crossing points. But in the spring of 1869, his family lost the low field they had rented for 12 years. Sheep took the ground. That was how it often happened. A family could be moved with a sentence, and the soil that had held potatoes in March could be grazing land by May. So Ewan, his wife Mary, and their 2 children were pushed uphill to a strip of rough ground above Glen Lorne, where the wind came hard from the north and the nearest good stone lay almost 4 miles away. By October, the problem was simple. They needed a home before winter. They had no money for slate, no cart strong enough to haul granite, no spare season to build properly. What they did have was a burn at the edge of the holding, and along that burn grew a thicket of willow so thick a child could hide in it standing up. Most men saw useless scrub. Ewan saw material. He cut the rods while they were still green, sorted them by length, and carried them up the slope in bundles tied with old rope. He marked an oval on the ground, 15 feet long and 12 feet wide, then drove split oak stakes into the earth every 16 inches, 3 feet down, shoulder high above. The first wall took 6 days. He wove the willow around the stakes in tight horizontal courses, pulling each rod until the whole thing strained against itself. When he finished, the wall had the spring of a basket and the shape of a small coracle turned upside down. Then he did the part that made the neighbors certain he had lost his mind. He stepped inside the wall and built another one, the same shape, the same height, 7 inches in from the first. Mary watched him for a long while before she finally asked why. Ewan rubbed the mud from his thumb and said, "A single basket bends, a double basket carries weight." That was all he had. Not a theory, not a book. Just 15 years of lifting wet fishing creels out of boats and learning what broke. Between the 2 walls he packed bog moss, dry bracken, and blue clay from the burn. Not loose, not solid. Tight enough to stop wind, open enough that the trapped air could not run away. He did not know the words thermal bridge. He did not know conductivity. He knew only this: cold moves where air moves. So he gave the cold nowhere to travel. When the walls reached chest height, he bent the stakes inward and tied them into a low dome. Then he laid more willow over the curve, packed the ribs with moss, smeared clay across the outside, and covered the northern half with turf cut from the bank. The finished shelter looked like something dragged out of an older century. No square corners, no proud gable, no tall chimney. Just a low rounded form tucked into the slope, with a small smoke hole at the crown and a doorway so low a grown man had to bow to enter. His daughter Kirstine cried the first time she saw it. His son Rob pretended not to care, then came home 2 days later with a split lip because the other boys had called it the rabbit hole. Myri did not mock him. That was worse. She simply looked at the walls at night when she thought Ewan could not see, and the question in her face was plain: would it hold? Down the road stood the man everyone compared him to, Suma's Boyd, 64 years old, a mason with hands like split stone, and a reputation that carried weight in 3 parishes. If a wall in Glen Lorne stood straight, there was a good chance Suma's had built it or taught the man who did. His own cottage sat on a rise below Ewan's holding, 2-foot granite walls, flagstone floor, lime mortar. Chimney wide enough to swallow a boy. It was everything a Highland house was supposed to be: heavy, permanent, respectable. So when Suma's walked up the slope in late November and inspected Ewan's willow dome, the whole glen waited for his judgment. He stood with his arms folded. The wind pulled at his coat. At last he said, "You have wrapped kindling in mud and called it wisdom." Ewan kept his eyes on the willow in his hands. "Maybe," he said, "but kindling bends before it breaks." Suma's gave a short laugh. "Stone does not need to bend." That line traveled faster than weather. By the first week of December, Ewan's house had become a joke people could point to. Women passing with pails slowed at the track. Men shook their heads at the ale bench. Children dared one another to touch the mud wall and run. It was not only that the shelter looked poor, it looked temporary. And in that world, temporary was shameful. A stone house told the glen that a family intended to remain. A wicker one told everyone they might not survive the season. Then the season answered. On January 6, 1870, the temperature fell so fast that water left in buckets skinned over before noon. By night, the burn behind Ewan's shelter had frozen at the edges. By the next morning, the thermometer nailed beside the kirk door showed 12 degrees, then 7. Then, before dawn on the 3rd day, 9 inches of snow arrived on a north wind strong enough to erase the road. The storm did not fall straight. It came sideways. It pressed snow under doors, into thatch, through cracked shutters, and into every poor seam in every wall. The glen disappeared behind a white roar. Chimneys smoked day and night. Families moved beds closer to hearths. Men who had planned fuel for months watched their stacks sink in a week. Inside Suma's Boyd's stone cottage, the fire was enormous, and still the room was cold. That was the secret Stone never admitted. Stone was strong. Stone was patient. Stone remembered every winter. But Stone also drank heat. The outer wall took the cold from the air. The inner face stole warmth from the room. Every crack in the mortar pulled a thread of wind through the house. You could sit 3 feet from the hearth and feel your back go numb. Suma's burned 12 good splits of birch the first day, 14 the second. By the 3rd, he had started adding peat blocks meant for February. His wife tucked blankets into the window frame. His eldest son slept in his coat. Water froze in a bowl near the door. The thermometer inside his cottage read 37 degrees. Not deadly if you kept moving, not safe if you were old, not kind to children. Up on the ridge, Ewan spent the first night waiting for the roof to sag. It never did. Snow climbed up the sides of the dome, then slid from the curve before it could gather enough weight to crush it. When the wind struck the wall, the willow flexed. Not much, just enough. The force traveled through hundreds of small crossings instead of breaking one rigid face. The first cracks appeared in the outer clay. Ewan patched them with wet hands until his fingers stung. Then he stopped patching, because the cracks did not matter as much as he feared. The wind still could not pass through the moss-packed belly of the wall. Inside, the small peat fire burned low and steady. Not a blaze, a red heart. The clay around the hearth warmed first. Then the packed wall took the warmth. Slowly, the shelter stopped feeling like a hut around a fire, and started feeling like the fire had entered the walls themselves. Mary took off one shawl, then another. Rob played on the reed mats without his mittens. Kirstine fell asleep with both hands open, not curled inside her sleeves. Ewan sat awake past midnight, listening to the storm run over the dome instead of through it. For the first time since they were moved uphill, he let himself believe they might not have been abandoned to the cold. 6 days later the storm broke. The glen came out white and silent. Smoke rose from cottages like thin gray thread. Doors opened slowly. Men shoveled paths to buyers. Women counted hens and checked children for frostbite. Everyone had the same hollow look that comes after a hard cold has spent the body. The minister, Alasdair Fenn, made his rounds that morning with a small brass thermometer in his coat pocket. He was not a dramatic man. He did not look for miracles. He looked for empty woodpiles, sick children, and old people who had not stood near enough to the fire. His first stop was Suma's Boyd's cottage. The room smelled of smoke and damp wool. The fire was still alive, but the family sat close to it as if the rest of the house belonged to winter. "How many peat blocks left?" the minister asked. Suma's did not answer at first. His wife did. "Less than half what we should have." The minister checked the thermometer. 37 inside, 9 outside. He wrote it down. Then he climbed the ridge toward Ewan Kerr's woven house, expecting something worse. When Ewan lifted the leather door flap, warm air came out into the snow. Not smoke, warm air. The minister stopped with 1 foot still outside. Myri was turning oatcakes on a flat stone. The children were sitting on the floor. The fire in the middle was no bigger than a cooking fire, and beside the door sat a little pile of peat that should have been gone days earlier. The minister stepped in and unbuttoned his coat. He did not speak until the brass thermometer stopped moving. 61 degrees. He looked at the wall, then at the fire, then at Ewan. "How much fuel?" Ewan pointed to 3 dark peat blocks beside the hearth. "That much in a day, if we are careful." The minister thought of Suma's burning 12 and 14 pieces of fuel to hold a room just above freezing. Then he touched the inside wall. It was dry, faintly warm. Not hot like stone beside flame, but evenly warmed, as if the whole house had become a slow earthen stove. "What did you put between these walls?" he asked. "Moss, bracken, clay, air mostly, air mostly." That was the answer. The thing everyone had mocked was not only a wall, it was a trapped pocket of still air wrapped in woven wood and sealed with earth. The willow gave shape. The moss held the gap. The clay stopped drafts and stored heat. The dome shed wind and snow. And the bank behind it gave the north side the protection of the ground itself. A poor man's materials had done what expensive walls could not. They had kept the warmth from escaping. The minister left the dome without finishing his tea. He went straight back down to Suma's Boyd's cottage and knocked. When Suma's opened the door, Alasdair said, "You need to see Kerr's basket." Suma's frowned. The minister held up the notebook. "Bring your coat." By noon, half the glen knew something was wrong with the joke. By dusk they knew what. Suma's Boyd ducked through Ewan Kerr's low doorway, with snow on his boots and doubt still on his face. The doubt lasted less than a minute. There are arguments a man can win with pride. A warm room is not one of them. Suma stood inside the willow dome and looked at the tiny fire. He turned in a slow circle, studying the curve, the wall, the smoke hole, the turf-backed north side, the child sitting on the floor without a blanket. Then the minister placed the thermometer where everyone could see it. 60 degrees inside, 14 outside. Suma's own cottage, measured that morning, was 38. His jaw tightened. Nobody spoke. At last he walked to the wall and pressed his palm against it. The clay gave nothing back except steady warmth. He leaned closer, tracing the slight pattern of willow beneath the surface. 7 inches? He asked. Near enough, Ewan said. And packed? Packed hard where the wind comes. Looser near the top so the damp can breathe. Sumas closed his eyes for a moment. He was not merely looking at a hut. He was watching 40 years of certainty bend. Stone had made sense because stone survived. But survival was not the same as comfort. A wall could stand for 100 years and still let a family freeze beside it. Sumas opened his eyes. I called it kindling. Ewan said nothing. I said the snow would press it flat. Still Ewan said nothing. The old mason nodded toward the wall. I was wrong. That was the first victory. The second came a few breaths later. Sumas asked, will you show me how you crossed the rods at the corners? By the end of January, Sumas had built the first inner willow skin inside his own stone cottage. He did not tear down his walls. He was too good a mason for that. Instead, he drove thin stakes just inside the granite, wove a second wall around the room, and packed the cavity with moss, straw, and clay. He left small breathing points high near the rafters, then sealed the lower cracks where the drafts had always entered. Within 8 days, the cottage changed. Not became perfect, changed. The corners stopped biting. The floor near the wall stopped frosting over. The fire no longer had to roar from dawn until sleep. His fuel use fell from 12 pieces a day to 6 or 7 in hard cold, and the room held 54 degrees when before it had struggled to reach 40. Sumas told people the numbers himself. That mattered. If Ewan had said it, the glen might have called him proud. When Sumas said it, the glen listened. By autumn, 4 families had woven inner skins into old stone cottages. By the next winter, 9 had done some version of it. One widow built a small willow sleeping room against the warm side of her house, packed with seagrass brought from cousins near the coast. A shepherd dug his structure deeper into the slope and used heather thatch over the dome before clay. A farmer who could not spare willow used hazel, then discovered it held even tighter once dried. Nobody called it an invention. They called it Kerr's trick, the basket wall, the warm skin, different names for the same forgotten idea, because Ewan had not truly invented a new house. He had remembered with his hands something older than the stone pride of the glen. Long before granite cottages became the mark of respectability, people had built with wattle, turf, clay, reed, and earth because those materials were close and forgiving. They understood that a house did not have to defeat the weather by being heavier than it. Sometimes it survived by giving the weather no straight path in. 6 years later, Glen Lorne still looked like a place of stone. From a distance, the old cottages remained the face of the valley, but if you knew where to look, you could see the change. A rounded sleeping room on the lee side of a cottage, a low turf-backed dome tucked near a byre, a woven inner wall hidden behind limewash. Small things, quiet things, the kind of changes that do not announce a revolution because they are too busy keeping people alive. Ewan's daughter, Kirstine, the child who once cried at the sight of the rabbit hole, became the best willow sorter in the glen. She could run a rod between her fingers and tell whether it would bend cleanly before any grown man tried it. Rob learned to pack moss in layers so the wall sealed without rotting. Myri learned where to leave breath and where to close every gap, and Sumas Boyd, old stone mason, changed the sentence he gave to young builders. He still taught them that a wall must stand, but after that winter he added something else. A wall that stands and steals your heat is only half a wall. The winter of 1875 was bitter again. Not as long as the first one, cold enough. Men still cut peat. Women still hung blankets by doors. Children still woke with frost on window glass. But fewer families ran out of warmth before the thaw, and when the wind climbed the ridge and struck the low-woven houses, it did not find straight cracks, proud stone faces, or open seams. It found curves, packed moss, clay, still air. The old materials did not look impressive. They did not make a man seem wealthy. They did not promise a house that would stand forever unchanged. They promised something more immediate. Tonight, your children will be warm. That was the lesson Glen Lorne learned the hard way. The oldest knowledge is not always lost because it fails. Sometimes it is lost because people become ashamed of it. They trade flexible for permanent, local for respectable, useful for impressive. Then winter arrives and measures the difference. In that winter, stone kept its pride, willow kept the heat, and the house they mocked as a basket became the warmest place in the glen.